As we go through our K through 12 years as students, we tend to dehumanize our teachers, or at least to view them as not real people, aliens of sorts. Even for our most beloved teachers, we compartmentalize them into the school building, finding it hard to imagine that they have whole lives outside of their time with us. Our conception of teachers does evolve throughout high school as we mature and start to learn that adults are people and not some mystical figures who simply intervene to ruin our fun or impose rules and regulations. Nevertheless, the way that some high school students terrorize their teachers might be a hint that our perception of teachers as complete human beings is still limited at this age. I know all too well of this terror, as I myself was a high school student just a year ago. A lot of times, when people hear the word culture, they automatically think of an ethnicity, nationality, or geographic location as describing someone's culture, or they think that a person can only belong to one culture. However, in 1871, E.B. Tyler, the first professor of anthropology at Oxford University, defined culture as that complex whole which includes knowledge, belief, art, law, morals, customs, and any other capabilities and habits acquired by man as a member of society. E.B. Tyler's definition of culture, which is the basis of anthropology's definition of culture, demonstrates that culture is really the way in which humans express their ideas, their institutions, tangible materials, and intangible concepts. Therefore, the multiple communities people belong to over the course of their lifetime develop individual cultures. Although the term teacher is a job title, it is also a community that possesses its own culture, a culture which all teachers contribute to. This can be hard to imagine, though. There are stereotypical images of what teachers look like and what certain teachers look like specifically. The gym teacher versus the art teacher versus the first grade teacher. These all evoke particular images if we are being honest with ourselves. Nevertheless, teachers come from diverse backgrounds. They are different races, different socioeconomic backgrounds, religions, genders, political ideologies, and they all have unique personalities. It is important to remember, though, that these differences among teachers are present among any community. Take, for instance, the Italian community. Some Italians live in Italy, but many live in other countries like the United States, for instance. Italians can be different races, come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, different religions, etc. Italian culture is not monolithic and contains many complexities and subsects. This is the same for the teaching culture. When deciding to study the teaching community, I focused on the culture of teaching specifically during the COVID-19 pandemic. Such drastic changes to the norm had a significant impact on the existing culture of teaching and the existing complexities within the culture. I first looked at the online community Teachers Connect. On the site, teachers are able to pose questions, express concerns, or share helpful advice. I also spoke to two teachers, one a kindergarten teacher and the other a high school calculus teacher. We talked a lot about how the constraints and extraordinary circumstances that came with the pandemic affected their teaching style and the logistics of their classroom. I wanted to hear their thoughts on the COVID-related policy decisions that their local, state, and national government officials were making. They were happy about some decisions and not so happy about others, but both admitted that they were not overly political. In this instance, I had to apply cultural relativity, the belief that culture should be understood from the perspective of that culture and not from an ethnocentric perspective, because I am a politically active person. I did not share that trait with either of my interviewees, but could not judge them from the perspective of thinking that political activism is important. In observing the teaching community through my assessment of the online blog and my conversations with these two teachers, I wanted to ensure that I was conscious of understanding the power at play that was influencing the teaching culture without their knowing it. Hegemony. I recognized that them living in different places, one in Dumont, New Jersey, and the other in Frederick, Maryland, would result in different government officials and those in positions of power, different superintendents, different county health officials, different council members. Different people in positions of power means different policy that inevitably affects teachers. I wanted to look further at power and a cultural impact that was even more discrete. The ways in which the The ways in which the politicization of the pandemic impacted policy decisions, how mask wearing came to be seen as a political identifier, and how safety regulations were limited in the name of personal liberties.
It is appalling that each and every one of you sitting up there as human beings, part of the human race, the only race that we have, would suggest to muffle people, to put masks on our face, to keep us from breathing oxygen, to get us to become sickly.
You preach pseudoscience and safety. Does anyone care about preserving the liberty of the people who pay your salaries? Some of you are up there smirking and smiling at public comments to which you do not agree. I have the photos, and they're shameful.
They want to throw God's wonderful breathing system out the door. You're all turning your backs on it. Can you prove that it's good for people to breathe carbon dioxide over and over and over again?
I also found it important to recognize how American culture dominated the American teaching culture I was studying. America's guiding economic principle of capitalism and the values that come with it were constantly impacting the policy decisions made by government officials. The rush to get kids back in school was fueled largely by the rush to get parents back in work. The intertwined nature of American economic philosophies and the teaching community demonstrates the importance of the anthropological concept, the political economy, which explains that in order to understand a culture, one must also understand the political and economic factors at play. While Mr. Jernigan expressed his dissatisfaction with the increasing politicization of education, and Mrs. Ritter admitted her frustration with some of the people in power in her district, who she felt did not care about her concerns as a middle-class teacher, the two of them did not focus on how political and economic circumstances were shaping their culture, exemplifying hegemony. They were not really concerned too much about the government, though. They were worried about their students. Despite the constant curveballs thrown at them, they adapted in the ways they could, taking agency to ensure that their students did not suffer. Mrs. Ritter stayed up to 3 a.m. digitizing lesson plans, and Mr. Jernigan stayed up late many nights mastering Zoom, Canvas, and anything he needed to in order to make sure students did not fall behind in the virtual setting. The teachers on Teachers Connect were doing the same, innovating for their students when they sought solutions or shared their nifty tips with other teachers. The teaching culture during the COVID-19 pandemic proved itself to be one of innovation, flexibility, and adaptation. Of course, there were teachers who were not able to adapt during this time. They may have retired or switched professions, or continued teaching but gave up on their students. Perhaps in studying them, one could understand how pervasive power can be in impacting individual agency. To strengthen this ethnography, I would love to diversify the amount of teachers I observe. Diversification in the sense of race and ethnicity primarily. As a woman of color and conjunctly a student of color, I am aware of the issues with diversity in education. I can count on one hand the amount of black or brown teachers I had, but this issue does not mean that the ethnic diversity that does exist among teachers should not be represented. It is important to remember that factors like race will alter the cultural experience of people, even though they might belong to another non-racial community, in this case, the teaching culture. I would like to include the perspectives of non-traditional teachers, like GED teachers or beauty school teachers. The perspective of teachers who were more politically involved throughout this period with actions like strikes, protests, and rallies would provide greater insight into the interaction of politics in American culture and the teaching culture at large. Like with most research, my fieldwork opened up multiple avenues of other topics to be explored. Studying a more diverse group of teachers and better researching and documenting the interactions between politics, policy, the economy, and the teaching community would provide a multidimensional picture of teaching culture. As with learning about different cultures, learning more about the teaching culture can enhance our cultural relativity and our understanding of the power that impacts our own cultures as global citizens.